I am a female, not a spring chicken anymore. And this is something unexplainable which happened to me one late rainy night. I haven't told anyone this, so submitting it anonymously online might help get this off my chest. If I told my family, I think they would just laugh at me and call me senile. I was watching TV in the living room, and I heard, "Hey, I'm home." It was coming from the front door. It was the voice of my daughter. She was in high school at the time. Normally I would just go to the door, unlock it, and let her in. I got up to do just that, but something felt wrong. Firstly, it was way too late for her to be out. I'm a bit of a night owl, by the way. Secondly, more importantly, I knew for a fact she was upstairs in bed. Whoever was out there wasn't my daughter. I stood there puzzled, trying to imagine how this was possible, and the voice behind the door continued, "Hey, I'm home! Hey, I'm home!" It, and I am now sure that it is an it, was repeating the same phrase. For some insane reason, I went to check. I know it sounds so foolish, but I couldn't help it. I felt compelled to go and look. I silently slid open the screen door and put my eye to the peephole. I saw something I don't think I'll ever understand. There was a figure stood before the door. It was a complete black shadow, as if someone had been dipped in paint. I could make out no features. The rain lashed against my window as I saw it stand there and repeat its phrase. "Hey, I'm home!" A figure was outside my door, slick with a black luster. It almost glistened in the moonlight, and I'll never forget it. It leaned forward as if to sense my presence and attempted to look through the frosted glass windows on the doors, through eyes I could not see. "Hey, I'm home," it repeated. I slowly slid the screen door closed and went to the phone and called the police. In the background I could still hear it repeating that phrase. "Hey, I'm home. Hey, I'm home." I couldn't stand that voice. There was never any change in pitch or intonation. It was as if it was a recording of my daughter, and it was being played through a tape recorder. I needed to get away from it. I didn't want to wake my daughter up, so I tried my best to hold things together. I quick-footed it upstairs and stood guard in front of my daughter's bedroom. I was on the verge of tears, as I could still hear it down there. "Hey, I'm home." But then, after about 10 agonizing minutes, I stopped hearing the voice. Shortly after, an officer arrived. I bet, to the police officer, I sounded completely insane. I'm sure of what I saw and heard, though. Thankfully, it hasn't come back.
This happened when I was younger, right before I became a teenager. It was when we all found out that my uncle was having an affair. The adults all thought I was too young to understand, but I knew. That's terrible, right? Well, it gets worse. Things between him and his mistress went south, and we were confronted with the aftermath. Apparently, this wasn't his first affair. By the way, my uncle is my mother's sister's husband. Naturally, the family was so angry at him, we all loved my auntie. We held a kind of kangaroo court at their house. They lived way out in the sticks, in a really quiet and rural neighborhood. My role in this grubby situation was to make sure their kids, both in elementary school, didn't hear a word. I was to take them far away from the arena of conflict and just keep them occupied while the grown-ups talked it out. Fortunately, they had a massive house. We shut ourselves in another part of it, a kind of summer house, and played some games. It wouldn't have been that nice for them to hear the fallout. The kangaroo court didn't start until the afternoon and went long into the night. And now that I believe I have adequately set the scene, Let me tell you what happened next. My cousins needed to go to bed. I tucked them in to make sure they were all right. I think it was around midnight at this point, and I got into bed myself. I awoke sometime later in the dead of night. I was thirsty, and I headed to the kitchen. On my way there, I thought I heard another noise, that someone else was awake. I hoped it was one of my parents. I couldn't see anyone out there, so I grabbed a canned drink and headed back to the room. But just as I was about to leave, I heard that noise again. I managed to locate the area the sound was coming from, the front door. They had a sliding door just in front of the main entrance, and I noticed that it was a crack open. I stopped dead in my tracks. I knew the door was shut only moments ago. I was sure of it, so the noise I heard must have been the screen door sliding open. Despite the unease I felt in the pit of my stomach, I wanted that door shut, so I crept over to approach it with the intention to close it. Then I saw something. I saw a black glove hand creep around the frame of the door, and that is when I felt my spine turn to ice. Soon after the hand, a black shoe shot through the gap at the base of the door. The owner of that shoe edged the sliding door further open to a gap of around 15 centimeters, and I slowly and fearfully looked up and met the shadow of an intruder. A woman was peering around the edge of the door. When her eyes met mine, I felt her glare. I froze in my tracks. My limbs felt completely stiff. When I saw her put her hand against the door and begin pushing it further open. This caused me to break out in goosebumps. I couldn't believe how brazen she was, entering the house right before me. I had to do something. My fight or flight kicked in. I thought that if I didn't do something, there would be consequences, potentially fatal ones. I was very lucky to be holding a can of drink. I hurled it as hard as I could at her in the eyes. Terrifyingly, when it connected, she didn't make a sound. I expected her to scream with the force that I put into the throw, but she just silently backed out the door. Before I realized what I was doing, I had locked the door, as I heard a chilling gasp from behind the door, and then silence. Knowing the other members of the family were on the other side of the house, the only way to get to them would be to go outside, as my uncle's house was really big. I slept by the doors to protect my cousins. The next morning I was awoken to the sound of my mother screaming. I opened the door, and sticking out of the screen doors were a pair of plier-like tools. There was some weird liquid on the locks too. My cousins woke up and were visibly shaken. Mum asked me what happened, and I gave her a rundown of the events. I soon discovered the would-be home invader was none other than my uncle's mistress. Though I was praised for my defense of my cousins, the incident rocked me, and I kind of hate my uncle for putting us through this situation.
Something really weird happened when I rode the night bus from Fukuoka to Osaka. I was heading back to my hometown for a week, excited to have some time off. I don't know if this sounds weird, but I always do this. I drink a load of beer, so I get sleepy before getting on the bus in the hope that the alcohol makes me drowsy and helps me get off to sleep. It's a pretty sweet technique, right? The second phase of Operation Pass Out on the bus is to put an eye mask on, and then I'm usually out cold for the night. I wake up about a stop or two away from my destination in the morning. Well, the plan worked, but for some reason I woke up a little earlier than scheduled. It was odd. It was as if I suddenly woke up. The bus was stationary. I guessed that we were in a service area or something. Before I removed my eye mask, I sensed that the bus was empty. I couldn't hear anyone. I pulled off the mask and removed all doubt. I was alone on the bus. The bus was dark. All the lights were out. It was weird to wake up and be in this situation. Usually, if you're on a bus like this and you pull into a rest area, you'd expect to see a driver or an old man asleep on the bus. At the very least, the lights on. Something was off. My gut was telling me so. It was weird. But when I got off the bus, it got weirder. Normally when the night bus stops, it stops in a service area, a place where passengers can stretch their legs, get a drink or a snack, use the bathrooms, etc. Well, when I got off the bus, I didn't see the well-lit area I was used to. I didn't even see a building at first, just darkness. The bus had stopped about 2 football fields away from any building, and there was nothing but parking bays as far as the eye could see. I wanted to know what the holdup was. I didn't want to be out here in the dead of night with no one around and no explanation. I headed out in search of the bathrooms to try and find someone. Hopefully the driver. There was a dimly lit building a little while away, so I went in that direction. Now that I think back to it, I should have perhaps seen the red flags. It was a service area, but all the lights were out. I don't like thinking back to that night. I used the bathroom. The flashlight on my phone was very useful. The convenience store was shut, but oddly, there was a sweet shop open, and there was an old man behind the register. I was going to go in, but something put me off. Probably the dead flowers in the vase next to him. There were a few people around. There was no music or conversation. There was nothing but the distant chirps of the crickets. The people weren't speaking, and that, in the dark, was very unnerving. So I wanted to get back to the bus. Other vehicles started pulling into the huge car park as I speed walked back to the bus. Many of them were hearses. Why were they all coming here so late? Nothing made sense here. Not all were hearses. Some were trucks and others minivans. They were all black in color though. To see all these vehicles, mainly hearses, suddenly speed into the car park was honestly frightening. I tried to run back to the bus, but I couldn't find it. I don't know if it left or it was due to all these vehicles arriving, but I was lost. I was really frightened at this point. I got as far as I could away from these cars, and I waited to see if I could spot some of the passengers I had seen on the bus, but I couldn't. After a while, I tried to call the bus company, but I couldn't get any signal. I decided to run. I managed to get away, and I found another bus stop area. After a bit of waiting, I luckily got another bus, and it took me to Osaka. From there, I was able to get to my hometown. I don't know if this is a scary story, but I just wondered if anyone has experienced anything similar. It scared me.
This happened a few years ago when I was working late at the lab. I was studying engineering back then, and I was writing my graduation thesis. I had so much to do, I was pretty much in the lab every night working long into the early hours of the morning. My thesis deadline was approaching, and I was racing the finish line, to be honest. I was writing my thesis between experiments. I honestly shouldn't have been wasting time earlier in the year. I finally wrote the outline for the thesis the day before the deadline, which only left a final confirmation experiment for me to do. The good thing was that in a sense time was on my side. Each experiment took a long time to conduct, a few hours before each reaction, so I could write my thesis while waiting. And because I had left it so late, it meant I would be pulling an all-nighter in the lab again. It appeared that I was the only one who had left it so last minute, so I was alone in the lab and the only person in the whole building. As you might expect, it was pretty lonely there. I turned on the lights on to make it seem less lonely, and I even turned on the lights to the corridor, just as a warning to anyone. What I did was dumb. Conducting experiments alone at night with no support is very dumb and dangerous, and I certainly should not have done that. I think the following happened around 3 a.m. At this point, my experiment was finally reaching its conclusion. I was making my checks. I didn't want any mistakes to undo all this good work, and I didn't have time to do it over. I was simultaneously checking my arguments in the thesis too. Please, there wasn't any glaring errors, and just a few minor things to correct. I could now see the finish line. I looked up from my work and saw a stranger standing at the entrance of the lab staring at me. I thought I knew everyone who worked or studied in this department, but I didn't recognize him. It was strange to see someone this late, let alone someone I'd never met. Our eyes met, and I thought to myself, this is bad. Something about this situation was very off-putting. It was past 3 a.m., and a man was just staring at me while I was all alone in the lab. I looked away, and when I looked back, the man was gone. Before I knew it, I was waking up at around 6 a.m., completely disoriented and confused. I must have dozed off. Now it was 6 a.m. It was a bit bright in the lab. The morning light was spilling in from the windows, and I scrambled to finish my thesis. I was suffering from lack of sleep, and I was all over the place. I couldn't shake the thought that the strange man could have been watching me while I slept. He was a total stranger. I was determined to ask someone about him after I was finished writing. I remembered that he was wearing a blue vertical striped shirt. The more I thought about the guy, the creepier it got for me, since I was the last one in the lab, and I had the only key. We had to check out the key and sign a book to show who was last in the lab and who had the key. I couldn't think of a logical reason as to how he appeared. As an engineer, a problem without a solvable solution tends to agitate me. This is worse. This was unexplainable. By 8 a.m., another student arrived at the lab. I told him about the man that I'd seen, and he said he may have entered through some unlocked door elsewhere in the building. I wasn't very satisfied with that answer, so I spoke to a senior lab technician. He chuckled and offered a similar explanation, but I pushed back. That was when he said something quite strange. He said there was an incident in the building where a young man took his life and joked that perhaps I had seen a ghost. I brushed this off as nothing but superstition. You know, a ghost story? Personally, I thought better of someone who had spent their life devoted to the application of logic. But to entertain my own curiosity, I researched our lab's history and found that a part of the story was true. There was a broken-hearted lover who saw no sense in carrying on and ended his life right there in the lab. I read on and came to an interview with a former student who discovered his body. I don't want to disrespect the departed, but I feel it adds context to the story. According to the former student, he was wearing the shirt he took his girlfriend out for the first time in. I felt chills race up my spine when his friend described the shirt he was wearing on the fateful night. A blue, vertical striped shirt. Now that I've had time to reflect on the incident, I somehow don't feel scared. I second-guess what I saw often. I don't know if what I had seen was brought on by my tiredness, or if I really did experience something paranormal. But it all feels like a dream to me. Maybe I'd heard a rumor, and in my tiredness and stress, I created the image of the figure watching me. I find some comfort in believing this. However, it doesn't explain how I knew the color on his shirt. It remains, to me at least, an unsolved mystery.
This happened when I was in my first semester. It was winter. I was living alone. When I went to bed, I lit my room with a miniature lamp. I brought it from home. When I lived with my parents, I didn't use the lamp much, but in this apartment, it was a real lifesaver. I had a thick curtain on the window facing the balcony to keep the chill out. When that curtain was drawn, it made the room completely pitch black. So if I happened to wake up in the middle of the night, I would be groping around for the switch for this lamp. One night, as usual, I went to bed and turned the lamp off, got into bed and fell asleep. I guess this was around midnight. I wondered how long I was asleep for. I was awake, but I hadn't opened my eyes. I was in a state of blank consciousness, if that makes sense. Asleep, yet awake. And then I opened my eyes. In the area I was living in at the time, it was silent. The miniature light bulb illuminated my room. I checked my wall clock for the time. I could make out the time without having to put my glasses on. It was just after 3 a.m. Even though my mind was awake, my body refused to move. I guess I was tired. I tried to think about what might have woken me up. I didn't have any messages on my phone and there was no alarm set. I had no intention of going to the bathroom, and in recent times I hadn't woke up at this time. I'm a pretty sound sleeper, and when I sleep, I usually sleep right through until the morning. I started freaking out a bit. There was no reason why I felt like this. I guess this feeling is just something innate in humans. When something wakes you from a dream, and there is no reason why, maybe your fight or flight instinct kicks in or something. Well, since it was 3 a.m., I thought that I'd better get back to sleep rather than worry about it. I was doing some deep breathing to get myself back to sleep, and eventually it worked. The next day I spoke to my friend about what had happened. I knew he would want to hear my story since he was into the occult and was seen as a bit of an expert at our university. "Did you want to open your eyes when you woke up?" he asked. Well, I was awake before I opened my eyes, then I opened them. But does true consciousness begin from the moment you open your eyes, or are you awake before that?" he replied. I made a face at him, as if it matters which way around it is. He was still thinking about it though. "Personally, I have never woken up from a dream with my eyes closed, but that's just me. It might depend, person to person. A reflex somewhere in the brain opens the eyes, and that's how you know you're awake. Eyes open, then consciousness is created," he said. "Oh yeah, then what about blind people?" I asked. "Well, I guess they're in the dark when they wake up, but perhaps their trigger is not visual. Perhaps it's something else. All I'm saying is there must be some sort of cue that lets you know that you're awake. I'm sure they feel air on their eyes or feel the muscles that move in their eyelids," he replied. I thought about this. It was an interesting idea. "How do you perceive the moment you wake up? Why not put it to the test then? Try keeping some tape or something over your eyes, and then you might notice the first thing you do when you wake. If opening your eyes is the cue you need to wake up, then you might not ever wake up if there is tape over your eyes," he said. Then he just turned to me and said in a nonchalant voice, "I know the reason why deep sleepers wake up in the middle of the night for seemingly no reason." I wanted to come to my own conclusion. Perhaps it was because of the bridge from REM sleep to non-REM sleep, or tiredness. Perhaps you wake when you're in a lighter state of sleep. I couldn't put my finger on the reason. While I was considering it, he spoke again. "The reason some people wake up is because someone is watching them. Have you looked outside your window lately?" His words were disturbing, yet they seemed to shine some light on my predicament. I couldn't prove his theory, yet I found some truth in his statement. Later that night, I was thinking about what he said, in the dark dead of night. I was considering that there could be someone watching me while I slept. I was lying completely still, too terrified to move, ears attuned to every sound in my house. My room was silent. I fell asleep, and I awoke later in the darkness. My light was still on, but it wasn't bright enough for me to see the clock on the wall this time. My first thought after waking was, someone is outside. God damn my friend for putting that in my mind. I couldn't escape that thought. I had never tried his theory. It would have been so easy to check behind the curtain and look out of the window if he hadn't said that someone was out there. I just wanted to go back to sleep, but my mind wouldn't allow me to until I looked outside. My heartbeat sounded as if it was echoing throughout the house. My bed was warm and the covers were safety, but I slowly rose to my feet. I grabbed my glasses. The air in my room was wrought with tension. I was scared. This wasn't some normal type of fear. This felt primitive, like the natural fear prey must feel in the presence of predators. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet. I faced the window. The heavy curtain was drawn shut. My rate of breath increased as I grabbed the curtain. I slowly drew it back to peek outside. I felt the cold night air behind the curtain. My breath fogged up the glass instantly. I wiped it with my pajama sleeve, and I saw the garden outside. The potted plants, the wall, the road, the other side of the wall. The sleepy neighborhood. Unlike my bedroom light, the moonlight illuminated them all. My eyes scanned the garden. They followed the cobblestone path through the lawn to the gate, and that's when I saw someone. Someone was outside. I drew my face closer to the glass. My heart felt as if it was about to burst. The cold air was against my cheeks. The figure was stood by a stone pillar near the gate. It wasn't someone looking to ring the doorbell. It wasn't someone looking to break in. It was just a figure stood by the gate. It stood completely still. It was just staring. He was right. The reason why I had been waking up in the night was because someone was watching me. I never checked outside before. I wonder how many times this happened. How many times had they stood out there? My body started trembling with chills. I was still staring at the figure out there. The clouds must have passed because the moonlight illuminated the figure's face. The face was blank, but I knew it was male. Somehow I had a sense of déjà vu. As if we had met before. Maybe I recognized this person from my school days. I thought that it could be someone I used to hang out with. Now that we were grown up, I felt like I could recognize them. I studied his face, and then it began to kind of glitch out. It shook side to side, like it was a screen. The figure then began to back away from the gate and into the darkness of the adjacent forest. I could hear the sounds of nature rise from the forest. I would have never seen that figure had I not checked outside. I put the curtain back and went back to bed. I felt as if I had seen something I wasn't supposed to. I haven't seen the figure again, and I'm not exactly searching for it. I'll update if something else happens.